You're watching Good Morning Britain. A whistleblower who played a key role in exposing the government's failure to protect child sex abuse victims now says that ministers should hang their heads in shame after further failures to implement recommendations that were made from an inquiry 4 years ago.
Yeah, and today Maggie Oliver is taking the government to court in a bid to get it to commit to the recommendations, including things like regulation of staff in children's homes. And Maggie joins us now. Good morning to you, and thank you for coming in again, because it's 14 years now that you've been campaigning on all of this. I mean, it is extraordinary when you look through some of these recommendations that they haven't been implemented. Some of them are pretty worrying. Do you think the government has just put this in the too difficult box?
You know, I don't have an answer for why successive governments have failed to implement these recommendations. You know, if you, if I take it right back to the beginning, when I joined the police, I was 42, married with 4 children, and I would go and take missing from home reports, for instance, from children in care. They are the most vulnerable children in our society. I resigned from the police because of the grooming gang scandal, which was covered up. But in 2015, the government then said they were going to implement a once-in-a-generation national statutory inquiry that would ensure that children of future would be safeguarded. We went into a 7-year inquiry.
Cost a lot
over £200 million. 7,000 victims and survivors put their faith and hope in that inquiry, re-traumatised themselves, including me, actually. And at the end of it, it didn't go far enough, in my opinion, but at the end, 20 recommendations came out, and 4 years later, they have not been implemented.
Can you just tell us some of the ones that haven't been implemented, Maggie?
Well, because they're really shocking.
Horrendous.
That they're happening at all, let alone not being changed.
And, you know, a big part of this for me is lifting the lid on what the government would hide in a corner. So the three of the 20 recommendations that we are focusing on in our judicial review. And bear in mind, you know, I run the Maggie Oliver Foundation, a little charity. We've had 2 individual donors who have made this possible. It's been 15 months. The government are throwing the weight of the state behind fighting against it. But 3 of these recommendations that we focus on are, number 1, to outlaw, to forbid the use of pain compliance, so torture.
OK,
on
so
children.
let's start with that one. These are pain-inducing restraint techniques, which I think people will be shocked are being allowed to use on children in care homes and these situations. Things like grabbing the children just below the child's ear to cause pain, to restrain them, twisting the thumb, twisting the wrist. And some of these techniques have been changed for prisoners, but not for those in care homes.
It breaks my heart. This goes way beyond politics. This is about child protection. And can you imagine an 11-year-old child being ripped from the family home through no fault of their own by the state, put into a children's home where they are, they've said they're not going to introduce checking up, what's the word? I've forgotten it.
Regulations. So at the moment, staff in children's homes are unregulated. What does that mean? Anyone can
go in. Often they don't speak English. They've got no training with children. So a child goes into a children's home, doesn't have rights of children in a family home. That's been outlawed as well. And the government is saying they're not going to introduce that. So the child is, like, you know, thrown on the floor. They're already traumatised. Those pain the use of that pain control is what we used to use in the police when I was a police officer. Can you imagine an 11-year-old child being thrown on the floor and 5 unregulated staff jumping on them, and that child has no rights in the law? At the moment, a child in care has no legal rights.
Not like a child in a home, a family home. We've got a comment, haven't we?
Well, the government. I just wonder what you make of this government statement, because they've said it's committed to tackling the horrors of child sexual abuse and exploitation and getting justice for victims and survivors. They say they have set out a clear strategy. For example, mandatory reporting, making grooming a statutory aggravating factor in sentencing and other things too. But again, they don't mention some of the recommendations that we're talking about this morning.
Everybody who's listening to that will think, here we go again, more empty words and promises. We want action. And the question to be asked is that after a 7-year statutory inquiry where all those victims and survivors put their hope in and were re-traumatised, as we now go into another statutory national inquiry where vulnerable victims and survivors are again being asked to put their trust in a new inquiry, why on earth should they, if those recommendations at the end of this process will sit on a shelf gathering dust for forever? Because the wording of the government response is horrendous, it's insulting, it's arrogant. They say there is no legal requirement for them to fulfil, to implement the recommendations. They don't have to give a timeline. It's entirely up to them. And that's quite right. But what I want this out in the open so that the whole country knows what we as a country are allowing.
So what are you hoping to achieve today? Because you're taking them to court. What's happening today?
Well, a judge is going to give us an oral hearing. This has taken 15 months to get here. So I don't know. I've never done this process before. So I hope that they will give us leave to take this to a full judicial review. And in that judicial review, we will argue the case for why these 20 recommendations should be implemented. And if they're not, then the whole country knows they're not. And then I would hope people, power and victims and survivors will challenge and shout out about how unacceptable this is.
Do you feel disappointed in Jess Phillips, the minister in this area? Because, you know, she's somebody with a track record of working with vulnerable women, particularly, and children. And when people saw her get that role, they thought, perhaps finally, someone who understands this issue who will make a change.
What I would say, Paul, is that, you know, this is not about one individual. But when it comes to Jess Phillips, I mean, it's very easy to stand in the House of Commons and read a list out of people who have died. If you speak to survivors who were involved in this inquiry last year, they were horrified with the way that that was manipulated and there was no intent to have transparency and honesty. So, but this goes beyond individuals. This is, it goes beyond Labour and Conservatives. This should be a non-political national priority. Child protection, for me, is why I joined the police. It's why I'm here today, because a child is the most vulnerable amongst us, and a child in care deserves the same rights as a child that lives in my home. And I do not understand how, you know, politicians who hold the power to bring this in can sleep at night without feeling shame about what they're doing. And so that's why we are trying to move this forward.
I mean, there's going to be another inquiry, a forthcoming inquiry, but presumably it's hard for you to have faith in that when the recommendations of the other inquiry haven't been implemented yet.
I took, or my foundation, my charity, the Maggie Oliver Foundation, we facilitated a meeting about 2 weeks ago with Baroness Longfield, who was chairing that new inquiry, and that was exactly the conversation from the 26 survivors and families in the room. How on earth can we trust this process when we have seen what's gone on? So I would say hope for the best, expect the worst, but even if this inquiry delivers recommendations that are fully accepted and a government can refuse to implement them, the question has to be, why on earth would we go through that process again? What's the point?
Well, you've been an amazing advocate for this issue, Maggie.
You have, thank goodness.
We'll watch with interest how it goes.